A sea monster resembling Godzilla appeared on the surface of the sea. With one swipe, it smashed a warship to pieces. Its ultimate move was ridiculously powerful. The invader's fleet was instantly annihilated. The reason the giant beast was so furious was that someone had killed its mate. Just a few hours earlier, an invading squad infiltrated the heavenly pool behind the city. They found the incarnations of the sea god and the moon god here, which were the two small fish in front of them. The general directly grabbed the white moon god. The sky turned red in an instant. Though the guardians arrived just in time, the general had already lost his mind by then. He directly stabbed the incarnation of the moon god to death. The boy with an arrow on his head was the savior. He sacrificed himself to the sea god to win this war. However, the savior was no longer there. Who would save the world in the future? Speaking of this boy, he actually came from 100 years ago. On this magical continent, there are 4 elemental powers: water, fire, earth, and air. These elements formed 4 nations based on their classifications. For millions of years, the 4 nations have coexisted peacefully. The key to balance lies in the successive reincarnations of the avatar. According to the rules of this land, whenever an avatar dies, their soul will inhabit a new body and be reborn. However, a catastrophe was about to unfold on this continent. A long time ago, a man was weaving through the streets of the Fire Nation. Behind him were countless pursuers. Before long, the man was cornered in an alley. The pursuers attacked with fireballs. The man summoned earth spikes to fling them away. At this moment, the pursuers realized he was an earthbender, and his purpose was to relay information. A stableman was waiting for him at the end of the alley. Suddenly, a fireball flew from behind, knocking him to the ground. The man also realized that this time the pursuers were unusual. He exerted all his strength to use the earth element. But he also knew that the pursuers would become more numerous, so he handed the information to the stableman. He stayed behind to hold off the pursuers. He lifted a stone wall and locked him and the pursuers behind. Then the man dashed into the crowd, but the number of opponents was simply too great. Eventually, the man's magical energy was completely exhausted. He was captured and taken back to the palace of the Fire Nation. The Fire King told the man that the information had been intentionally leaked by him. The purpose was to draw everyone's attention to the Earth Nation, while the Fire Nation could take the opportunity to attack other nations. However, the man now realized it was too late. The Fire King turned him to ashes. The true target of the Fire King is actually the Air Nation, not because he feared the Air Nation, but because of one person among them. That is the only person in the world who can master all 4 elements, and this follows a predictable pattern. The new avatar will appear in the Air Nation, so the Fire King planned to flatten the Air Nation, while he was still growing up, to send the avatar into the cycle of reincarnation. This way, he would have enough time to rule the world. The Air Nation is located at the Southern Air Temple. All the members here are monks, and Aang is the most gifted child here. He had reached the level that adults could achieve at a very young age, but compared to the tedious training, he preferred to ride the air currents and soar in the sky. At this time, he didn't know his identity as the Avatar, but as the actions of the Fire Nation grew more rampant, Abba Jang Suo could only reveal the truth to him and hoped that Aang could take responsibility and save the other 3 nations. However, Aang found it hard to accept the truth. He even struggled to sleep at night. To vent his frustration, Aang sought out his beast friend Appa. He wanted him to take him into the sky to clear his mind. While they were out to relax, the people of the Fire Nation had already reached the Air Nation. Everyone in the Air Nation was fighting desperately. However, this time the Fire Nation came prepared. They specifically chose the day of the comet's passing. Although this place is filled with high monks, the opponents are simply too numerous. Moreover, there are catapults on the ships continuously launching stones. The Southern Air Temple was engulfed in flames. The elders sacrificed their lives to cover the children's escape. Even Abba Jang Suo personally joined in to protect the children. However, the other party has obtained the power of the comet, even if Jang Suo fought with all his might. In the end, he couldn't withstand the overwhelming flames of the enemy. At this moment, Aang had flown enough to be on his way back to the city. He encountered a massive tsunami on the sea. It swept him directly into the sea. At this moment, Aang's powers manifested. His powerful elemental control formed the seawater into a sphere. In a distant land of ice and snow, a girl, Katara, was training. However, her control over the elements didn't seem very strong. She could only create some ripples. She was the last descendant of the Southern Water Tribe. Her brother Sokka was the chief of the Wolf Cove. He was also the leader of the Northern Water Tribe. Recently, their fishing yields had been sparse. so the siblings took a fishing boat to a farther location. Hoping to find a different catch, they encountered an undercurrent, and crashed their fishing boat into an iceberg. And the small boat floated away on its own. At this moment, Katara noticed a large ice sphere in front of her. She realized that something must be sealed inside it. But for now, they needed to find a way to summon their boat back, so Katara tried to use waterbending. Unexpectedly, the ice sphere seemed to resonate. This scene was also discovered by Prince Zuko of the Fire Nation. He was exiled by his father. He could only return home if he captured the Avatar. So, seeing this moment, he was extremely excited. Sokka and Katara were also in shock. A figure emerged from the ice sphere, collapsing onto the snow. Katara wanted to bring him back to the village, but her brother disagreed.
A mysterious little bald person. What part of that makes you think?
Katara argued that he was just a child. It was simply unreasonable to leave him here like this. But Sokka recognized that Aang's identity was significant, to avoid causing trouble for their tribe. He urged his sister to think carefully, but Katara was very determined. Sokka could only agree. Soon, the three returned to the tribe. The elders in the village recognized Aang as a disciple of the Air Nation. The others found it somewhat unbelievable after hearing this, because the Air Nation had been exterminated 100 years ago. Now they could only wait until Aang woke up to know the answers. The next morning, Aang woke up from a nightmare. Although he didn't know where he was, he saw children playing outside. He hurried over to join them, but Sokka came over to stop him, and asked him who he really was. At this moment, Aang remembered his companion Appa, so he flew into the sky and called out loudly. At this, everyone gasped. He really was an airbender. Then Aang asked if they had seen a flying bison, but the water tribe members had never seen such a creature. Before long, Appa soared into view. Then the village elder welcomed him. Aang told everyone about his experiences. He mentioned that it was during the time of the comet ceremony. The elder showed a shocked expression upon hearing this. He then stepped aside to tell a story. Once, the four nations lived in harmony, but 100 years ago, the Fire Nation suddenly attacked. The Avatar was supposed to save the world, but he vanished without a trace, and the Air Nation had not been seen for a long time. Aang realized that 100 years had passed after hearing this, and all his loved ones had died. At the same time, he felt very guilty. He felt responsible for not fulfilling his duty as the Avatar. The Fire Nation had already occupied most of the land. The Water Tribe had also paid a heavy price. Katara's parents were killed in the war. Sokka had to take on the heavy responsibility of becoming the chief of the Northern Water Tribe. He was only 13 years old at that time. But later, all the waterbenders of the Southern Tribe were killed. Katara was the last one left. She escaped with her brother to this place. Now only the Earth Nation was still fighting desperately. Sokka wouldn't allow his sister to train. If the Fire Nation discovered that there were still living Southern Water Tribe members, a new war would break out. She couldn't even form a single water ball right now. Aang taught her a little. To their surprise, she succeeded. At this moment, Katara suddenly froze. The water ball fell to the ground. Aang followed her gaze, and noticed a warship from the Fire Nation approaching. At this time, Sokka learned that enemies were closing in. He quickly warned the tribe to prepare for battle, but Katara couldn't understand why the Fire Nation wanted to eliminate them completely. At this moment, the Elder provided the answer, because he was not just the last Airbender, but also the Avatar. Soon, Prince Zuko arrived with his men at the door. He stated that if they handed over Aang, he would immediately lead his team away. After hearing this, Sokka immediately wanted to hand over Aang. After all, this Avatar had been hiding for over 100 years. They couldn't rely on him, but Katara didn't think so. She boldly stated that Aang was their last chance to leave this place. All their hopes were pinned on him. In the end, Sokka was persuaded to change his mind. She grabbed her weapon and went outside. She challenged Zuko to a duel. However, she wasn't a waterbender and couldn't defeat Zuko. It seemed she was about to be killed by him. Aang stood up. His airbending made it incredibly easy to take down the foot soldiers. Even against Zuko, he showed no fear, but Zuko was already enraged. He commanded his men to raze the village to the ground. Anand asked Dazu to take him away, and let go of the people in the Wolf Cove. He comforted Katara and Sokka, saying that no one had ever stood up for him before. This made him feel warmth for the first time. Aang's fearless spirit earned Sokka's respect. The two prepared to ride Appa to rescue people. Meanwhile, Aang successfully used his airbending to steal the keys. He snuck into Zuko's room. and discovered a manual on the Avatar's teachings, so he took it along with his weapon. But at this moment, the soldiers discovered he had escaped. Aang flew into the air. The soldiers quickly launched fireballs to intercept him, but Aang dodged them all. Zuko personally took action. He charged up a fireball and successfully shot Aang down. In a critical moment, Sokka and the others arrived just in time to save him. Zuko shot out an even larger fireball. It seemed about to hit Appa. Katara actually summoned a water column and successfully extinguished the fireball to avoid endangering the villagers. The group didn't return to the city, but headed to the southern air temple. Aang looked at the ruins around him. Everything he once knew had vanished without a trace. Even Abba Jang Suo had become a skeleton. These shocks filled Aang with rage. Aang flew directly into the air and conjured a massive storm. It even blew the two of them to the edge of a cliff. Fortunately, he remembered Abba Jang Suo's warning just in time. This prevented him from losing control, and he stopped. At this moment, he understood his mission. In order to prevent his people from dying in vain, Aang decided to accept his destiny. However, this was not an easy task. The Avatar's powers weren't so easy to control. They decided to follow the notes from Zuko's journal to seek help at the temple on Kyoshi Island. Kyoshi was the fiercest warrior. Her temple might hold the secrets to mastering Aang's powers. Just before they set off, Aang suddenly noticed something odd in Katara's backpack. He discovered it was a winged lemur. At this moment, Katara noticed a scroll beside her. Upon opening it, she found it was the waterbending scroll the elder had tucked inside. She was born a waterbender. This identity would accompany her for life. Aang then buried Abba Jang Suo's remains. They set off towards Kyoshi Island. At this moment, Aang unexpectedly found that the lemur had followed them, so he named it Momo. Before long, a massive statue came into view. After they landed, Sokka rushed straight into the temple. Several female warriors appeared and subdued them. Katara quickly said that Aang was the Avatar. However, the warriors didn't believe her. They stated that if it were true, there would be signs. Suddenly, Kyoshi shot two beams of light, illuminating Aang.
I think that might be a sign.
Then Aang and the others were brought before the village leader. Because the Avatar had been missing for 100 years, Kyoshi Island had been closed for 100 years as well. Now that guests had arrived, the village leader strongly opposed letting them stay on the island. But her daughter Suki had a different opinion. If Aang was indeed the Avatar, then the villagers should not abandon him. And looking up some information wouldn't cause any harm. The village leader could only agree to open the village for 48 hours. On the other side, Zuko followed his uncle to the Fire Nation's military intelligence base in order to find the whereabouts of Aang. However, Zuko was quite nervous. He feared that his discovery of the Avatar would be exposed. However, his uncle advised that sometimes one must approach problems from a different angle. He went straight to General Zhao at the base. He inquired about any recent activities in the seas. General Zhao mentioned that they were recently tracking a group of shark squids. They hoped to improve their rations, but General Zhao sensed something unusual. He made an excuse for them to return the next morning. Although the two were being very cautious, Zhao's subordinate still managed to gather intelligence. He learned that the Avatar had reappeared. General Zhao quickly ordered his men to gather information. At this moment, Zuko returned to the dock, only to find that General Zhao's warship was missing. At this moment, a soldier came to report. A flying bison had been spotted near Kyoshi Island. Zuko instantly understood. The news of the Avatar had ultimately not been kept a secret. Meanwhile, Aang found through his research that there was no useful information available. Aang felt extremely frustrated. Now, he couldn't control his powers at all. How could he save the world? Katara told him. Before awakening as the Avatar, Kyoshi was once a wanderer, until she was hired by a wealthy family as a servant. Upon hearing this, Aang became very interested in Kyoshi's story. What had happened that allowed her to successfully awaken? Katara said, the Avatar's body houses the souls of all past Avatars. She suggested that he try to communicate with the past lives, to let them teach him how to master his powers. So Aang decided to give it a try. He stood before the statue of Kyoshi. To his surprise, he truly entered the realm of consciousness. Meanwhile, Suki was training her subordinates. She suddenly realized that Sokka was secretly studying outside the door, so she disbanded the team and called him in for private lessons. During the process, feelings gradually began to develop between them. However, before they could get too close, the alarm on the island suddenly went off. At this moment, Aang was still in the consciousness space, learning some techniques from Kyoshi. Vatu told him that mastering the Avatar state required diligent practice. He needed to learn all kinds of bending techniques, to ultimately unlock the ultimate skill of the avatar state. This state was a collection of all his past lives, allowing power to be concentrated in one person, even more powerful than 1,000 benders combined. Moreover, each avatar state was different, so Aang had to walk his own path. Kyoshi also said, many people had already sacrificed for him. If he continued to evade his responsibilities, more people would die. As she spoke, she pointed her finger at Aang's forehead, allowing him to see a vision of the apocalypse in the future. If he continued to avoid his responsibilities, he wouldn't be able to save the world, nor could he save this small island. At this point, Aang realized that the Fire Nation had already landed on the island. Then Kyoshi directly transmitted a force into his body, in order to let him know the power of the avatar state. At this time, Katara was blocking Azula and her group. However, her newly learned waterbending technique wasn't yet proficient. She could handle the minor soldiers, but she couldn't withstand even one attack from Azula. Katara was about to be killed. Kyoshi descended from the sky.
Impossible.
And Azula couldn't even withstand a move from the avatar state. Afterward, Kyoshi soared into the air and landed in the village. A massive shockwave scattered the soldiers. General Zhao turned around and saw Kyoshi's glowing eyes, and was immediately stunned with fear. But Kyoshi didn't waste any time, using the 4 elements to create a large vortex. With one move, he knocked everyone down. Then she unleashed an even more powerful surge of energy. General Zhao quickly ordered his men to retreat. However, when the light faded, Kyoshi instantly vanished from sight. In his place was the fallen Aang. Seeing the people around him injured because of him, Aang felt a deep sense of guilt, but the village chief and everyone bowed to him, because they had just seen a glimmer of hope for life. Before leaving, Suki gave her folding fan to Sokka and also gave him a kiss. The next destination for the group was the Northern Water Tribe. Kyoshi said that a major disaster would occur there, and only Aang could stop it. Meanwhile, Azula had not given up. The royal uncle suggested that since the news of the Avatar state had been leaked, they might as well join forces with General Zhao. But General Zhao informed the Fire King of the news. On the other side, Aang and his friends were making their way to the Northern Water Tribe. Suddenly, he discovered there was also an air nomad ahead, and the direction of the other party's advance was towards Omashu. That was the last stronghold of the Earth Kingdom. The Fire Nation had tried various attacks, but couldn't breach the city defenses. On their way into the city, they met a new ally Jet. With his help, they successfully infiltrated the city, and quickly chased after the air nomad, only to find that he was a limping boy. The boy could fly because of his flying device. Suddenly, an explosion occurred behind them. Aang and Katara hurried to help put out the fire. Afterward, the boy's father Sokka ran over to thank them for their help. He took them back to his home and told them that these explosions were caused by the Fire Nation. Unable to conquer the city directly, the Fire Nation had sent spies to sabotage from within. Therefore, Omashu was not as safe as they had imagined. That night, while practicing, Katara accidentally discovered that Sokka was whispering to someone else. She wanted to go over and join in. Suddenly, Jet appeared and stopped her, until the mysterious person summoned the fireball. She found out that Sokka was actually a spy in the city. The two followed the mysterious person out of the city. However, the mysterious person had already discovered them. He called his accomplices in advance nearby to ambush. Jet showed no hesitation, and drew his hook sword to engage the enemy. Katara also summoned a water sphere to attack the enemy, but Jet wasn't unprepared either. He blew a whistle to call for reinforcements. Soon, they took down all the enemies. Afterward, Jet and the others took Katara back to their base. Omashu was now at the end of its strength. As the war dragged on, the king of the Earth Kingdom was growing old, which gave the Fire Nation an opportunity. Jet and the others were all orphans of the war, and they formed a guerrilla group to seek revenge. On the other side, Zuko and the royal uncle learned that Aang and the others had arrived in Omashu. They disguised themselves and also infiltrated the city. Before long, Aang and the boy returned to the shop. They had made a new discovery. They found a canister of explosives in a cave behind them, as well as some uniforms of the Earth Kingdom. This indicated that the perpetrators of the bombing were also Earth Kingdom people. At this moment, Katara returned as well. She told Aang and the others about her findings. However, after spending some time together, Sokka had developed a high regard for Sokka, and was unwilling to believe the fact that he was a spy. Instead, he suspected that Jet was lying. This led to an argument with his sister. He made Katara so upset that she ran off. Just then, she ran into Jet, who was looking for her. He told her that Sokka would be going to meet the king soon, so he placed a bomb in the other person's suitcase. planning to blow up the king to incite the Earth Kingdom's spirit. Katara found this a bit outrageous. She had to consider that what her brother said might be true, so she quickly went back to find Aang and her brother. And her brother told her that the bombing incident had nothing to do with Sokka. He was just making a blueprint for a hot air balloon, although that could also be considered treason. The urgent priority now was to rescue the king. As soon as they stepped out, a fireball came flying at them. It was Zuko and the royal uncle who had infiltrated. Aang said he would hold off Zuko, so the siblings could hurry to save the king. The royal uncle reminded Zuko not to use firebending, or it would easily attract the Earth Kingdom soldiers, so Zuko faced Aang using her martial skills. Meanwhile, Sokka was about to meet the king. In the distance, an archer was lying in wait. They waited for the right moment to shoot a fire arrow. At the critical moment, Katara arrived just in time to use her waterbending. Although she successfully stopped the explosion, the news of the king's assassination still caused a huge uproar. Meanwhile, Zuko learned that her notebook had been stolen by Aang. Unable to contain her anger, she used firebending. Soldiers immediately rushed toward them. The royal uncle immediately released a pillar of fire into the sky to save the prince, then ran toward the city. This gave Zuko a chance to escape the city. On the other side, Aang wasn't so fortunate. He was captured and treated as an arsonist. Upon learning this, Katara immediately prepared to rescue him, but the Earth Kingdom's prison was built in the mountains. To reach it, she had to pass through the royal palace. At this moment, Sokka's son mentioned there might be another way. Before they could set off, Aang had already been brought before King Bumi. 100 years ago, Bumi and Aang were very good friends. Bumi recognized Aang's identity immediately. After a brief exchange, Aang recognized him as well. Both were surprised at how the other was still alive after a century. Bumi then ordered his men to prepare a feast for Aang. However, during the meal, Bumi has been mocking on for evading responsibility. He casually mentioned the extermination of the Air Nation. Aang could no longer hold back his fury. However, Bumi chastised him for not taking responsibility. He said that although he was now 100 years old, but he had not truly lived for 100 years, especially not in such an important century. Aang accused him of having lost hope. Bumi declared that he accepted Aang's challenge. They then walked through a passage directly to the duel arena. Bumi took off his clothes and revealed his still strong muscles. He gave Aang no time to react, and summoned a massive boulder to smash down on him. Aang didn't want to fight his friend, so he could only passively dodge. Bumi's attacks grew increasingly powerful. He then said, "No one wants to fight, but they have been fighting for 100 years. As he spoke, he gathered another massive boulder. Aang jumped with all his strength, but his foot was struck by the boulder, causing him to fall. Bumi accused him, saying that he was the Avatar, yet he had abandoned everyone. He then pulled down the stones above the duel arena, and a massive stone came crashing down toward Aang. Aang had to use his airbending to catch it. However, another stone fell above him. He had to divide his focus to hold up another boulder. If this continued, once Aang exhausted his energy, neither would escape death. Bumi urged him to make a choice. On the path to saving the world, there would inevitably be sacrifices. If he was unwilling to give up anything, then in the end, he would protect nothing. However, Aang was still unwilling to give up. This only made Bumi more disappointed. He stated that the world was doomed. Just when Aang was about to exhaust his strength, Sokka and Katara arrived just in time. Katara created a slide on the ground, and Sokka saved Bumi. Aang quickly released the stone on the opposite side. He moved the massive stone above him aside. However, Bumi refused to accept this outcome. He accused Aang of cheating by using his friend's power, but Aang replied that the Avatar was still human, and no one had said he couldn't use his friend's strength. Aang took out the whistle hanging around his neck. This was a gift from Bumi, which he had always used to summon his animal friend Appa. Now, he intended to use it to awaken Bumi. Bumi saw this object and successfully reignited hope. However, while the two were in the heat of battle, Zuko had already ambushed the route taken to escort the royal uncle, successfully rescuing him. They then rode away from the Earth Kingdom, and returned to their warship. Soon after, Earth Kingdom soldiers urgently reported that the Fire Nation army was approaching, and would reach Omashu before dawn. Aang's location had now been exposed. Staying here would bring more trouble, so Aang and the others decided to leave first. With Appa's help, they successfully escaped. They continued toward the Northern Water Tribe. Along the way, they saw countless forests destroyed by the Fire Nation. This filled Aang with a deep sense of guilt. At this moment, Katara took out a seed, and told him that death would bring new life. A scorched earth could also give rise to new forests, and this was the goal they were striving for. Aang took the seed, and felt much better inside. Then Sokka discovered a girl on the road. She was hiding behind a large tree, very scared. Sokka approached her and started to talk. Under her guidance, the group arrived at a village. The villagers were very frightened by the sudden appearance of the three. Aang realized that some tragedy had occurred here. A man explained that the Fire Nation had burned the forest just to create a shortcut, but after the fire, strange things began to happen. All the crops that were not affected also died. Livestock have also started to stop eating. With no food, the villagers had to send people out to search. However, the teams that went out never returned. The man's son was among those teams. He believed that some force from beyond the world was changing the land. Aang understood that the force he spoke of was actually the spirit world. He decided to enter it and bring back the villagers. He told his siblings that the human world was not the only one. There existed a realm called the spirit world. Usually, there was no intersection between the two, but in some places, the barrier was weaker. Aang believed that the fire had further weakened the barrier. The group discovered some statues in the forest. Aang thought these were the statues of forest spirits, so he sat down and meditated until nightfall. Anang finally succeeded in having his soul out of the body, but for some reason, his sibling spirits were also brought out. The three could only go to the spirit world to complete their mission. Soon, they encountered a large bird. It claimed to be a spirit of knowledge, and said that only the Avatar could understand its words. To others, it sounded like this. Then it said that Aang was destined to step into this world, but his siblings didn't belong here. The longer they stayed in the spirit world, the more danger they would face. Aang stated that they only wanted to find the villagers, and would leave afterward. The bird said to keep walking along the path, that there was a house at the end. The people inside might know the whereabouts of the villagers, but after the bird left, Sokka noticed strange footprints behind him, but when the others turned around, there was nothing there. Sokka thought he was just too nervous in seeing things, but suddenly, a terrifying monster appeared ahead. This time, everyone could see it. Aang recognized the scars on the monster's face. It was the forest spirit that had been injured before. Aang tried to use his bending, but found he had no energy left. At the same time, Katara was unable to use her bending as well. Sokka could only try to attract the monster's attention. Then the three of them ran into the forest in different directions. However, the monster released a cloud of white mist, and then disappeared. Sokka saw a three-tailed spirit fox. It said that the spirit they had just seen was called Heibai. It was not inherently evil. It had just endured too much suffering. It also warned Sokka to be careful of the mist. Then it disappeared. Meanwhile, Katara heard a very strange laughter. When she approached, she saw a familiar face. Suddenly, she fell all over the snow. When she stood up, she realized she was back at the Wolf Cove. Not only that, her long-deceased mother suddenly appeared there. Katara was overjoyed and ran into her mother's embrace. But in the next moment, a burst of fire suddenly erupted outside. Her terrifying childhood experience replayed itself. Fire Nation soldiers burned her mother to death. Katara wanted to use her waterbending to stop them, but she could only gather a few small drops of water. Katara was tormented greatly by this experience. On the other side, Sokka was also trapped in an illusion. He was back on the day he enlisted as a soldier. His father drew a seal on his forehead as a reward for his bravery. Sokka hid in a corner of the illusion, but unexpectedly learned the truth from that year. His father's friend accused Sokka of almost killing his comrade. It was his father who had suppressed the incident. Meanwhile, Aang also fell into an illusion. However, this kind of illusion was a minor issue for him. Aang held his breath and focused, breaking through the illusion. Suddenly, a monster appeared before him. The monster was surprised that he could break the illusion, but the next moment, it realized that Aang was the legendary Avatar. It had a grudge with one of the previous Avatars, because it had stolen the face of the Avatar's loved one. That was why the Avatar had wanted to kill it. But in the end, he had stolen its treasure. Aang stated that he only wanted to find his friends. The monster laughed heartily upon hearing this. It said that those friends and villagers were its food supply. Aang quickly fled the cave after hearing this. He saw the house the bird had mentioned, but what he didn't expect was that, when he opened the door, he saw Junzwa who had died 100 years ago. Aang thought he had fallen into another illusion, but Junzwa said it was all real. After the Fire Nation exterminated his clan, most air nomads chose to reincarnate, but he chose to wait for Aang here. He had been living alone here for over 100 years. Aang missed his family dearly, and hurried over and hugged Junzwa. Then he asked the other party how to find his companions and villagers. Junzwa told him that the white mist in the forest could create illusions. reflecting people's darkest memories. Some people could even see unknown truths. Those who became trapped in it would become food for the face-stealing monster. At this moment, Aang remembered that the monster had said that a past avatar had stolen its most important possession. Jianzhua recalled something after hearing this. In history, there was an avatar named Roku, who had once battled the face-stealing monster, but the holy land of Roku was located in the Fire Nation. If Aang wanted to contact him, he would have to go to the Fire Nation alone, and return before the face-stealing monster fed again. Fortunately, their current location was not far from the Fire Nation. As Aang was about to leave, Jiangzhua called out to him. He said that even when the Fire Nation attacked, he couldn't change anything in the Air Nation. He hoped Aang wouldn't blame himself for it anymore. After their farewell, Aang returned to the human world. He entrusted Appa to protect his siblings and set off on his journey. Before long, he entered the territory of the Fire Nation. Aang arrived at Roku's sanctuary, but unexpectedly, the supposed neutral guardians of the sanctuary attacked him. The moment they laid eyes on him, Aang quickly ran away. Along the way, he encountered a guardian named Xiaoyu. Xiaoyu brought him to the statue of Roku. He told Aang that the chief guardian believed the Fire Lord was the future, so he had joined the Fire Nation with his followers. Only Xiaoyu remained steadfast. Xiaoyu stayed behind to hold off the other guardians. Aang approached the statue and tried to connect with Roku. He quickly succeeded in entering the illusion. Roku initially chastised him, asking why he didn't bow, but the next moment, he told Aang to stand on one leg like a chicken. Aang realized that he wasn't as serious as he had imagined. Instead, he was like a playful old man. Roku told him that although each avatar was a reincarnation, each life was unique. Aang then stated the purpose of his journey. Roku informed him that he had once stolen a treasure, the pendant of the mother of ancient elf faces. It created the faces of all living beings. That was why there were so many different identities. And the mother of faces was the mother of the face-stealing monster. Even a monster would need familial love. Roku told Aang that he could use the pendant to get back his friends, but he also reminded Aang that so-called friends could very well be a burden. Sometimes, he would have to make choices. He must prioritize the safety of the world. Afterward, Aang returned to reality. He found the pendant on the shelf, but when he stepped out of the room, he saw that everyone on the ground had collapsed. As he approached, he realized that everyone had been paralyzed. Suddenly, a several-meter-long tongue struck his neck. Then he also fell to the ground paralyzed. A woman walked over and tied him up. She was a bounty hunter hired by Zuko. Soon, Zuko and the royal uncle arrived. He hadn't expected the hunter to actually capture Aang. Thus, Aang fell into Zuko's hands. Along the way, Aang pleaded for her to let him go first, promising that he would return after rescuing his friends. Of course, Zuko would not agree. However, after walking for a while, General Zhao suddenly surrounded them with his men. Zuko quickly said that she was a princess, but General Zhao waved his hand, and an expert archer shot through the royal uncle's hair tie. This was the most elite ranged unit under the Fire Lord. Only then did they realize that everything had the support of the Fire Lord. They could only hand over Anang. However, at midnight, a ghost-faced warrior appeared in the woods. He had hidden under a merchant's cart to sneak into the city. Then he infiltrated the prison, dispatching all the guards and rescuing Aang. However, as they were escaping, the patrolling soldiers still spotted them, but both of them were skilled fighters. They knocked the pursuers to the ground. But there isn't much time left for Aang now, so they used a ladder as a pole to try to leap out of the city. However, General Zhao shot a fireball that brought them down. Then he ordered his men to capture Aang alive. Upon hearing this, the ghost-faced warrior drew his knife against Aang. General Zhao didn't believe he would attack, but seeing the blood marks on Aang's neck, he could only order his men to open the city gates. However, once the two escaped, the archer shot the warrior directly with an arrow, and quickly used his airbending to whip up a cloud of dust. Thanks to the sturdy mask, the warrior narrowly avoided disaster. But when Aang lifted the mask, he discovered that it was actually Zuko. After hesitating for a moment, he decided to take her with him. When Zuko woke up, Aang proactively brought up the matter of the notebook. He expressed that he shouldn't have stolen it, but he had no other choice. The air nomads had all passed away. Only that notebook could teach him something, and sometimes he would read the notes late into the night. Upon hearing this, Zuko began to share her own story. Once, Zuko was not as extreme as she was now. At that time, the Fire Lord planned to use the entire 41st Division as bait. He treated the soldiers as expendable in the war. Zuko couldn't stand it and stood up to oppose him, angering the Fire Lord. He saw it as a sign of weakness. He challenged Zuko to a duel. However, during the fight, Zuko was still too afraid to strike. As a result, the Fire Lord was very disappointed. He left a permanent mark on her face. The Fire Lord exiled her along with the 41st Division. He could only go home after capturing the Avatar. Before long, Aang parted ways with Zuko. He quickly returned to the spirit statue. Aang used the statue to bring back his friends and the villagers. What was hard for him to accept was that when he returned to that house, Jiangsu's spirit had already dissipated. Aang had no time to grieve. He led his team onward to the Northern Water Tribe. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Ji, one of Zuko's subordinates, hurried over. He reported that General Zhao had discovered that he was the ghost-faced warrior. The royal uncle hurriedly urged Zuko to escape. Under the cover of darkness, he would find a way to explain the situation to the Fire Lord, but the group had no idea that this news had actually been deliberately leaked by General Zhao. When Zuko boarded the small boat, she discovered that it was filled with liquid bombs.
Prince!
The next day, Aang and the others had arrived at the Northern Water Tribe. When he saw the tall tower in the tribe, a disaster from the language of the spirits flashed through his mind. Then the leader Locke warmly welcomed them. In fact, they knew they were going to be attacked long ago, because not long ago they had detected a Fire Nation fleet advancing rapidly towards their base. Now the Water Tribe was fully prepared for battle. At this moment, Sokka suddenly noticed Princess Yu in the crowd. He felt that she looked familiar. At the banquet, Sokka couldn't stop looking at the princess. Katara encouraged him to go over and talk to her. However, Sokka thought she was a princess, and he had no idea what to say. At this moment, Master Pakku of the Northern Water Tribe approached Katara. He offered for her to learn waterbending from Goya. Sokka saw that Princess Yu was about to leave. He finally couldn't hold back and chased after her. At this moment, he realized that although Princess Yu was the spiritual leader of the Northern Water Sect, she was very approachable. Noticing Sokka, she offered him some sweets. A Water Tribe soldier came over to remind the princess that it was time for the blessing ceremony. At this point, Sokka noticed the adornment on her head. He recalled the three-tailed fox he had seen in the spirit world. Its tail had a similar ornament. The next day, the high-ranking officials of the Northern Water Tribe held a meeting. Locke hoped Aang could lead them to counterattack. However, Aang informed them that he had not yet awakened. This greatly disappointed Locke. Meanwhile, Katara found Goya to learn some combat techniques. However, this was a place for learning healing techniques. Katara wanted to fight, but in the north, women weren't allowed on the battlefield. So Katara directly challenged Pakku. As the master of the Northern Water Tribe, his strength was naturally unfathomable. However, Katara had also proven herself along the way. The two engaged in an intense battle. Katara had learned skills in the Earth Kingdom. These skills were very useful for surprise attacks, but Pakku was even stronger. He immediately used an ice spike cage to successfully trap Katara, yet her strength earned Pakku's respect. Meanwhile, Aang found Princess Yu. With her help, he successfully contacted the Water Tribe avatar Korok. However, Korok told him that the prophecy of the spirit was unavoidable. Aang couldn't believe it. He stated that on Kyoshi Island, the Kyoshi could descend using his body. Aang hoped he could also descend to stop the disaster. However, Korok informed him that he had been fighting monsters from the spirit world for a long time, which had led to his soul being corrupted. He couldn't descend using Aang's body. He had to use his own power to prevent the disaster. After returning to reality, Aang shared the news with Princess Yu, Sokka, and the others. From now on, they could only rely on themselves. Not long after, a Fire Nation warship approached. The soldiers on board suddenly discovered that a flying bison was heading towards them. The soldiers quickly sounded the alarm, but these ordinary soldiers were no match for Aang. With the help of the siblings, the warship was quickly destroyed. However, when they flew into the air, they discovered that there were so many such warships that they covered the entire sea. Upon returning, Aang stated that the disparity in strength between the two sides was too great. He suggested that the Water Tribe take a defensive stance. However, General Zhao had other plans. He prepared to send a team in through hot air balloons. Soon, the fleet launched an attack. Countless fireballs rained down on the tribe. Aang and the Water Tribe soldier Rick began to intercept the young people of the Water Tribe. having witnessed Katara's battle, all called her master. Under her command, the operation unfolds. The bombing continues until deep into the night. The water sect excels at drawing power from the moon. Tonight is the full moon night. Their strength will reach its peak. The Emperor's uncle suggests General Zhao halt the attack for now, but the opponent claims to have a secret weapon. Saying this, he opened a wooden box and took out a knife. He said that the moon on the full moon night is not an ordinary moon, but is the ice moon. At this time, the barrier between the human world and the spirit world becomes very weak. Some monsters will abandon their immortality and come to the human world. The weapons made from their flesh and blood are powerful. They can even kill the sea god and the moon god, thus destroying the water sect's source of power. When he takes out the knife, Korok also sensed the appearance of his weapon. He quickly warns Aang. The appearance of his weapon here has only one purpose. At this moment, General Zhao stated that he will only kill the moon god, because killing the sea god would result in the death of all the people of the water nation, but only killing the moon god would make the water manipulation technique vanish. Then, the group takes a hot air balloon to the rear. They successfully find two koi in the heavenly pool, one black and one white. They form a balanced Tai Chi symbol. General Zhao captured the white moon god. The moon instantly turns blood red. At this moment, Aang is preparing to prevent the disaster. Unexpectedly, Zuko is still alive, and he has infiltrated the water sect. Katara urged him to leave quickly. She will hold off Zuko. She has also learned new techniques from Paku, and successfully binds Zuko with ice spikes. Aang successfully found General Zhao. He pleads with him to release the moon god. He can follow General Zhao and leave. However, General Zhao stated that he wants to become the new Fire Lord. As long as he kills the moon god, the future world will have one less manipulation technique. The Avatar with only 3 manipulation techniques will no longer be a threat. The Emperor's uncle seizes the opportunity to ambush and knock down General Zhao, and quickly uses his energy to grab the moon god. However, General Zhao makes a mighty leap. He successfully stabs the moon god with the knife. The moon flickered a few times and then disappeared. Then, the water manipulators in the water sect fearfully discover that everyone's water manipulation techniques are no longer usable. Subsequently, the water tribe suffers a devastating blow. Just as the oracle predicted, the powerless water sect can no longer withstand the warships. The soldiers of the Fire Nation rush into the city. Even Princess Yu falls into despair. At this moment, Aang recalls the teachings of the past avatars. As an avatar, one must bear the responsibility of saving the world. With this in mind, Aang resolves himself. He unleashes all the power within his body. Then, he sits in the pool. Princess Yu guesses his intention. She warned him that if he continues down this path, he will perish.
This isn't my time or my world. I can save my world.
As power flows into the sea god's body, a monster several dozen meters tall rises into the air. Aang sacrifices himself to the sea god. The people of the water tribe kneel as they witness the deity, and the sea god, seeing his children being killed, is instantly filled with rage. He begins to wipe out the Fire Nation's troops. Then, he angrily plunges into the sea. With a single strike, the Fire Nation's fleet is completely annihilated. However, at this moment, Aang has been completely consumed by the sea god. No matter how Katara calls, it is of no use. Only angry Shell remains. At this moment, Princess Yu suddenly thinks of something. When she was young, the moon god had touched her. She carries the life force of the moon god within her. That is why Princess Yu became the spiritual leader. Now it is time to return the moon god's power. After saying this, Princess Yu picks up the moon god's body. She then walks into the pool and transforms into the new moon god. The sea god sees the moon god return and finally calms his anger. He released Aang. In the end, the water tribe pays a heavy price for victory. Meanwhile, the Emperor's uncle secretly escapes with Zuko. Aang knows that the war is not over. Now he plans to learn water manipulation from Katara first. Then he will learn other manipulation techniques. The sooner he awakens, the sooner he can end the war. However, what he doesn't know is that the true goal of the Fire Lord is not the Water Tribe, but to attack Omashu during the chaos of war, and capture the king of the Earth Kingdom. Now, all he needs to do is conquer the Water Tribe. Then the whole world will belong to the Fire Lord. Moreover, the comet is approaching. At that time, the Fire Lord's power will reach new heights. This concludes the first season. This work is based on the comic of the same name. It contains a lot of Eastern elements. The special effects are top-notch. The performances of the actors are also very good, especially Zuko and the Emperor's uncle. who are both righteous and wicked. Their emotions and backgrounds are quite rich. The protagonist's skills are also quite good, though sometimes it feels a bit out of place. Moreover, there are some moments of dark humor in the film, which are quite interesting. Compared to the original work, the series doesn't overly modify the story. It stays very close to the original plot. The greatest strength is the emotional backgrounds of the main characters. Most of the plot does not feel dull. Instead, it enriches the characters' nuanced emotions. Overall, it is highly recommended to watch. Looking forward to the release of the second season. Alright, this concludes the video. If you like my channel, please click to subscribe. Your support is the greatest encouragement for me.